Lecture 30, The Limits of Creativity on Gore, Version 2. What you can change, what you can add, and what destroys the world. A lecture by Sarah Thorne. Foreword to Lecture 30, The Limits of Creativity on Gore. I have spoken with Gore experts, with GMs and teachers, with the creators and players of the pen and paper Gore RPG and RP modules, with longtime collectors and authors. What I say here is not my opinion alone. It is the voice of many who have loved and preserved this world for decades, and their anger is not personal. It is despair over something that is dying. What this lecture is. This lecture is not against creativity. It is against thoughtless destruction. It is not against expansion. It is against replacement. It is not against new ideas. It is against ideas that ignore the world in which they stand. Who should hear this lecture? Game masters who want to keep Gore alive. Players who want to understand why rules exist. People who ask themselves, am I allowed to do this? And want an honest answer. Who does not need to fear this lecture? Those who play BTB Plus. Those who use Tales of Gore. Those who respect Norman's lore and are creative within its boundaries. Why the tone is so hard. Soft words did not prevent the destruction. For years we asked politely, we explained, we offered help. The fragmentation got worse. Player numbers fell from nearly 5,000 to a few hundred. Gentle words did not save Gore. This lecture is not for those who already treat the world with respect. It is for those who do not understand Gore or do not want to understand. What this lecture is not. It is not a personal attack. It is not a godlike proclamation of truths. It is not the word of Norman. It is the collected voice of many Gore experts who watch in despair as their world dies. A final clarification before you listen. This lecture is not against persons. It is against wrong mindsets that become destructive. Not because the people who hold these mindsets want to destroy, but because destruction is the result, whether they intend it or not. Intention does not matter, outcome matters. If you recognize yourself in some of these words, do not feel attacked. Ask yourself, is my mindset leading to destruction, and am I willing to change it? That is the only question that matters. On the Kurtzman comparison. The comparison to Kurtzman is not an insult, it is a diagnosis. Kurtzman argued exactly like those who destroy Gore. We have to be creative, rules don't matter, the audience wants this. The numbers proved him wrong. Star Trek lost its audience. Kurtzman lost his job. The same is happening to Gore. Those who argue like Kurtzman will end like Kurtzman with a dead universe. That is not an opinion, that is history. On the two extremes. But let us be clear. The old, arrogant by-the-book approach did nothing to improve the situation. It drove people away. It ignored many of the books itself. It left no room for lore-compliant creativity. It became a cage, and it defended itself aggressively against every argument without having any of its own. That is not the answer. The opposite extreme, anything goes, no rules, no respect for the lore, no responsibility for the world, is not the answer either. It is equally destructive just on the other side. It fragments the community. It confuses new players. It replaces Gore with something else and still calls it Gore. The answer is neither cage nor chaos. The answer is BTB Plus, respect for the lore, Logical expansion where Norman left gaps, boundaries but not a prison, creativity but not destruction. That is the path that keeps Gore alive. On those who say, I don't care. Some have said, I don't care about the decline of Gore, I just want to have fun. Second Life tells its users, it is your world you create here, you decide. That is true as long as you do not harm what others create and love. If you build your own world in your own corner, no one will stop you. But if you call it Gore, while ignoring almost everything that makes Gore what it is, and if you bring new players into that version without telling them the truth, then you are not expanding the world. You are replacing it with something else. You have the right to have fun. You do not have the right to mislead new players about what Gore is. And you do not have the right to demand that the rest of the community accepts your version as equal to Norman's. If you teach new players a version that Norman would not recognize, be honest with them. Say, this is my personal interpretation. This is not what Norman wrote. If you want to learn the real Gore, read the books. That is not your world. That is a different world using the same name, but it is no longer Gore, on the anarchist mindset. Some bring an anarchist mindset into Gore, not as a thought-out philosophy, but as a simple rejection of all rules, all structure, all authority. Gore is not anarchist. Gore has rules. Gore has structures. Gore has authority, the home stone, the caste, the priest kings. Norman did not write anarchy. He wrote a hierarchical, structured, rule-bound world. Those who reject rules and authority altogether are not playing Gore. They are playing something else and calling it Gore. And that is not creativity. It is replacement. What I did not say in the lecture but must be said now. Second Life Gore is not officially authorized by Norman's people. They tolerate it. They accept it as long as it does not harm the lore. But if it leaves the course too far, if the lore is ignored, if the world becomes something else, if new players learn a version of Gore that no longer resembles what Norman created, then they have the right to act. A DMCA takedown would not remove the parts that go in the wrong direction. It would remove everything. All of SL Gore. The good, the bad, the careful expansions, the destructive replacements, everything. Because a DMCA does not distinguish. It erases. Those who say I don't care about the decline of Gore are not just harming the community. They are risking the existence of every Gore sim in Second Life. This is not a threat, it is a fact. Norman's people have been patient. They have been tolerant, but patience has limits. If the replacement continues, the tolerance will end. And then there will be no SL Gore left for anyone, not for the lore purists, not for the creative expanders, not for the anything goes crowd. Nothing. Think about that before you say, I don't care. On the reaction to this lecture. Those who attacked this lecture did not offer arguments. They did not engage in discussion. They simply reacted with anger. They had no real counterpoints, only offense. That is not a debate. That is avoidance. No one who attacked this lecture has given a single example of where it is wrong. No one has shown how ignoring the lore preserves Gore. No one has explained why player numbers fell from nearly 5,000 to a few hundred if anything goes is the right path. Anger without argument changes nothing. Now hear the lecture itself. Part 1 Opening. Masters, mistresses, free men and free women, Kajare and Kajarii. I greet you, you know me. Sarakin Thorne, 43 years a Gorean, once a publisher, always an explorer, and today I speak about something that has caused more conflict in the Gorean community than any war between cities. What are we allowed to change? John Norman himself said, Gore is much more than my books. He gave us permission to add, to explore, to create, but he did not give us permission to destroy. There is a difference between expanding a world and tearing it down, between adding new rooms to a house and burning the foundation, between honoring the lore and replacing it. Some say, Anything goes, it's all fiction. We can do whatever we want. They are wrong, not because I say so, because the world says so. A world without rules is not a world. It is a sandbox, and a sandbox has no soul. The circle is open. Part 2, what Norman said and what he meant. John Norman wrote 35 novels about gore. He created a world with its own history, its own physics, its own rules. And then he said, "Gore is much more than my books." He meant, there are stories left untold. There are regions left unexplored. There are characters left unwritten. He did not mean, ignore the rules, rewrite the history, change the fundamental nature of the world, destroy his philosophy. Much more is an invitation to expand, not to replace. When Tolkien said Middle-earth was larger than his books, he did not mean you could put spaceships in the Shire. When Herbert said Dune was bigger than his novels, he did not mean you could turn the Bene Gesserit into vampires. And when Norman said gore was more than his books, he did not mean you could ignore the priest kings, the Kurii, the caste system, the technology laws, or the fundamental structure of his world. Much more means there are gaps, fill them. Much more means there are mysteries, explore them. Much more means there are side characters, give them stories. Much more does not mean burn the house down and call it renovation. Part 3, what you can change, BTB Plus. In BTB Plus, we have always said, the books are the foundation, but the foundation is not the whole house. So what can you change? You can add new cities that Norman never described, as long as they fit the geography and culture. New characters who interact with the world, as long as they respect its rules. New technologies that are logical extensions of existing ones, as long as they do not break the priest-king laws. New cultures in unexplored regions, as long as they are consistent with the anthropological style of the books. New interpretations of existing lore, as long as they do not contradict established facts. You can expand the history of a minor character, the culture of a little described region, like the Pani or the jungle peoples, the technology of the builders or physicians, as long as it stays within the allowed boundaries, the politics of a city, as long as it does not break what Norman established. You can explore unanswered questions. What happened to the spider people after Book 1? What is beyond the barrens? Untold stories, a scribe's investigation, a merchant's journey, a slave's path to freedom. Unseen corners of Gore, the far north, the deep south, the hidden islands. You can interpret the priest king's motives, as long as you do not turn them into humans. The Kurii is culture, as long as you do not make them cuddly. The caste system, as long as you do not abolish it. It is the backbone of Gore. The rule is simple. Does your edition contradict something Norman explicitly wrote? If yes, do not do it. If no, it may be allowed. Part 4, what you cannot change, the foundation. Some things are not negotiable. The priest kings are not gods. They are aliens. They have technology, not magic. They enforce laws, not commandments. They are not benevolent, not malevolent. They are pragmatic. You cannot turn them into human wizards. You cannot make them ascended beings who left behind magical artifacts. You cannot ignore the Nest War, the weakened surveillance, the lost technology. That is canon. The Kurii are not demons. They are aliens. They are not evil for the sake of being evil. They have a culture, a history, a military structure, a biological imperative. They are not mindless beasts. You cannot turn them into fantasy monsters. You cannot make them servants of a dark lord. You cannot ignore their 20,000-year war with the priest kings. That is canon. The technology laws are not suggestions. They are enforced. No guns, No motorized vehicles, no wireless long-distance communication, no advanced weaponry that could threaten the priest kings. You cannot give your character a sniper rifle because it's cool. You cannot build a car because it's convenient. You cannot have a radio because it helps the story. If the priest kings would destroy it, it does not belong on Gore. The caste system is not optional. It is the structure of Gorean society. You cannot ignore it. You cannot democratize Gore. You cannot turn U-bars into elected presidents and pretend nothing changed. The hierarchy is the world. The homestone is not a metaphor. It is the soul of every city. You cannot treat it like a tourist attraction. You cannot ignore it. You cannot replace it with Federation values. The homestone is the heart of Gore. Norman's philosophy is not optional. He always wanted to prevent changes to the core philosophy of Gore. Expansions within the lore are acceptable and are practiced in his later books, such as the Panny novels. But he did not want his philosophy destroyed. Those who reject his philosophy altogether are not playing Gore. They are playing something else. Part 5. Why alternative timelines do not work for Gore. An alternative timeline changes history. It asks, what if something had happened differently? That works for Star Trek. It works for superhero comics. It does not work for Gore. Why? Because Gore is not a collection of events. It is a world. Star Trek is about the adventures of the Enterprise. You can change the adventures without changing the nature of the universe. Gore is about the nature of the universe itself. The priest kings, the Kurii, the castes, the technology laws, the philosophy, these are not plot points. They are the fabric of the world. If you change the fabric, you are not telling a different story. You are telling a different world. And that world is not Gore. An alternative timeline in Gore would require changing the Nest War, the priest king's technology, the Kurii's invasion plans, the caste system, the home stones, and Norman's philosophy. At that point, why call it Gore? Call it something else. Build your own world. But do not pretend you are still on the Counter-Earth. Part 6. Why the Kurtzman style destroys worlds. Norman always allowed expansion within the lore. His later books prove this. But he never allowed the destruction of his philosophy. The Kurtzman style, ignoring lore, breaking rules, prioritizing cool over consistent, does not expand Gore. It replaces the philosophy with something else. And once the philosophy is gone, Gore is gone. That is not creativity. That is replacement. Part 7. How to tell if your addition is creative or destructive. Ask yourself these questions. 1. Does this contradict something Norman explicitly wrote? If yes, do not do it. 2. Does this break the priest-king laws? If yes, do not do it. 3. Does this ignore the nature of the Kurii? If yes, do not do it. 4. Does this abolish the caste system? If yes, do not do it. 5. Does this turn Gore into something it is not? Fantasy, sci-fi utopia, modern Earth? If yes, do not do it. 6. Does this add something new that fits within the existing framework? If yes, it may be creative. 7. Does this fill a gap that Norman left open? If yes, it may be creative. 8. Does this explore an unanswered question? If yes, it may be creative. 9. Does this preserve Norman's philosophy? If no, it is not Gore. The rule of thumb: if you have to ignore the lore to make your idea work, your idea is not creative. It is replacement. If you have to break the rules to feel free, you are not free. You are replacing Gore with something else. Part 8. Closing the circle. I have spoken. Now I ask, what are you building and what are you replacing? Do you want to preserve Gore? Then respect its rules and its philosophy. Do you want to expand Gore? Then do it logically within the framework. Do you only care about your own fun? Then play your own game, but do not call it Gore, and do not mislead new players. The choice is yours, but the consequences are real. Gore is a world worth preserving, not as a museum, not as a frozen relic, but as a living world, one that can grow without losing its roots. You can add new branches, you can plant new seeds, you can explore new lands, but you cannot cut down the tree and call it gardening. Norman gave us a gift, A world with depth, with history, with rules, with philosophy. Respect that gift, not because you have to, because it deserves to remain what it is. The circle is yours.